Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the University of Kent for tonight's In Conversation. Because you've bought a ticket, you're supporting Kent students through the Kent Opportunity Fund. I'm Corey Adams, a percussion scholar, reading an MA in Hispanic and Comparative Literature. Thank you for supporting students like me so that we can excel and make the most of our time at university, regardless of personal circumstances. Now, without further ado, please welcome to the stage our Chancellor, Gavin Esler, and his special guest, Joe Brand.
Well, hello, wherever you are. It's very difficult to see you out there, and welcome. I suppose this is actually, despite all the troubles in the world, a very, very great time for satire and comedy. You may know that Private Eye magazine is selling more than ever before. In America, Saturday Night Live has been boosted greatly by a huge endorsement from the President of the United States, who's clearly a big admirer. And I've often thought that the sharpest people to explain our world are not necessarily novelists or filmmakers or journalists, but actually quite often cartoonists and people who make a living out of comedy. So please we welcome one of the best tonight, Joe Brand.
Thank you. Thanks.
And it is a funny old world, isn't it, really?
I wish it in reality was funny. I mean, I know Donald Trump is funny, but he's terrifying as well, you know, and his kind of, I think a lot of people are sort of behaving as though, you know, oh, he's a misogynist, and will hold the front page, you know, because women have been putting up with the sort of guy that he is for years. So to me, the misogyny bit of him's quite dull, really. I've met more interesting misogynists, and I have many, and I just.
Will you name names later? Or,
I might do,
okay.
Yeah. And so I kind of, in some ways, I just find it depressing. I mean, it's like Thatcher, you know, people used to say what a gift Thatcher was to comedians. And that was true to a certain extent, but for a lot of people's lives, telling a few jokes about her wasn't really enough to cheer them up. Do you know what I mean?
I think I get your point.
Because she ruined a lot of lives, I think. So in some ways, yes, absolutely, he's perfect for satirising. But I think there's kind of a very odd thing going on with him and his family. I'm kind of uncomfortable about the glamorousness of the women. I just find it, and the fact that they're just pushed forward, they got a nice suit on or whatever, but they don't say anything, you know, and I find that unsettling. So it remains to be seen what happens, really.
Well, thank goodness things are so much better here, obviously.
Has Jeremy Corbyn got a nice suit? I don't think so.
No, I was actually thinking of, you know, in terms of funny lines, I thought the Foreign Secretary saying we're going to make a Titanic success of Brexit was quite, you know.
That's a great line.
I wish I'd thought of that,
yeah,
actually.
Absolutely.
I mean, how do you see your job? Do you see your job to be the escape from reality, a reflection of reality, a critique of, I mean, how do you see that playing?
Well, I think as someone, you know, who always wanted to do comedy, who has a dad who suffers from depression, I think I probably see my job as trying to cheer people up and make them laugh, really. And I think every comic that you talk to has kind of a different motivation for why they're doing the job they do. I think the world's a bit of a shit place. I'm a bit miserable and a bit of a pessimist. And I think that anyone that can throw into the pot something entertaining should do it, you know, because, you know, I don't know who originally said life's shit and then you die, but I subscribe to that in some ways, you know, although I do have faith in elements of human nature to make it better, but not much.
On that cheerful note, tell us a bit about your background, because you're partly brought up in Kent, weren't you? You're born in London, is that right?
That's
but
right,
brought
yeah.
up in the other bit of Kent.
Yes. Brought up in a village called Benenden in Kent, which, do you know it? There's people murmuring, yes, I think you'll find Princess Anne went to school there. Yes, she did, because there's a big girls' school there. It's the next one down from Rodine, possibly, I think. And to us plebs in the village, it was just a big sort of Tudor-looking building that we were allowed in the summer to use the swimming pool. Oh, thank you. And, you know, it's interesting, this brief, isn't it, that private schools have to, you know, to allow them their status. They are supposed to sort of contribute to the community. And as someone who has 2 daughters at state school, I can't see much of it going on around where I live. But, you know, there you go. So, yes, it was very much kind of them and us, the big school in the village. And I lived a really lovely kind of rural village life.
Well, and you became a psychiatric nurse. I mean, what was your aim there? What did you want to be when you're growing up? Because you don't fill in a box saying when you're 14 saying, I'd like to be a comedian, do you? So what did you think you were about to do?
What did I think I was doing?
What were you doing?
Well, the thing is, I got thrown out of home when I was 16 because for various reasons, things went horribly wrong in our family. My dad had depression, which was untreated, and he was a very difficult person to live with. I was the only girl in the family. I particularly rebelled against the way that he treated us. And so I was given the choice of giving up this boy that I was going out with or leaving home. And obviously that was, yay, a way out, you know. So I left home, moved into a bedsit. School, weirdly, allowed me to go back 1 day a week to do my A-levels. And I worked in the civil service the other 4 days a week. In my A-levels, I got 2 Ds and an E. And I went back to college to do better and got 3 E's. So that was like a bit of a disaster. So what in fact happened was I moved back home for a little bit when I was probably about 19, 20. And my mum said to me, oh, you know, you've got to do something. And the reason I did psychiatric nursing, I think, is because I did a joint degree in psychiatric nurse training, which meant that I didn't have to do a purely academic degree. I could do something useful for 6 months of every year. And also, I kind of, when I look back at it, I think at the back of my head, I wanted my dad to get some treatment and thought, well, if I know a bit about it, I can talk him into it, you know. So there's an element of that to it as well. And plus, it was an absolutely amazing job, and I really loved doing it.
Did you? I mean,
I did.
Really, did you get a lot out of that?
A huge amount.
Why?
Yeah. Well, because for a start off, I think there is quite a thin line between normal and you know, mental health, someone with mental health issues, and creativity moves either side of that line quite easily. And you know, there are a lot of comics, I think, who display certainly some aspects of different types of illnesses. For example, if you say Eddie Izzard, what he does with his kind of surreal ramblings, if a psychiatrist interviewed him, they would call that flight of ideas, which is a symptom of bipolar disorder. And I went out with a guy for a bit when I was a nurse who was actually a stand-up comic. And his sister suffered from bipolar disorder. And one day he brought her into the emergency clinic to see someone because she was becoming quite seriously ill. And I was actually at lunch at the time. And when I came back from lunch, the registrar that had seen her, I didn't know it was him at the time, and he said to me, "Oh, we have someone here, and she's been brought here by her brother, and I'm a lot more worried about him." Because and he was the stand-up comic, you know, and so I kind of feel that in some ways it was a natural home to be, really.
Well, that's very interesting, because then I was going to ask you how you made the transition to comedy yourself, but it might not have been such a huge jump.
No, it wasn't. I think one thing that really helped me was the fact that because I was in charge of a psychiatric emergency clinic in southeast London, you know, and I was the one that was always wheeled out to tell people they couldn't have what they wanted. So, for example, you would maybe get very drunk people in that wanted to be admitted, or they wanted to have a drug called heminevrin, which helps you withdraw from alcohol, which is a minor tranquilizer like Valium and very addictive, so doctors were very reluctant to hand it out. So because the doctor would kind of go, "You're not having it," and run away, and then I would be forced to be, you know, like the Berlin Wall and say, "No, you really aren't having it, and can you please leave?" So I was the one who got the most abuse, and also probably the most physical abuse as well. So in many ways, actually being a stand-up and someone going, "Fuck off, you fat cow," was like, can you not do any better than that? Because, you know, I knew a lot of female comics at the time who actually gave up because they couldn't cope with the level of sort of misogynist heckling. And so I really was at an advantage in some ways. I just didn't really care. Fat, big deal, you know.
What I read about your first gig as a comic was precisely that and it didn't go very well because you were heckled for the whole night.
I was. Well, first of all, I only did like 5 minutes. Secondly, my material was terrible because I'd written an over-intellectual, clever 5 minutes about the work of Sigmund Freud. Right. Don't ask me why. I don't know. I thought it was hilarious, but it wasn't. It was in a nightclub in Soho, and it was a charity gig, and the audience weren't really used to going to comedy. Also, because I was a new act, I was put on at the end at midnight, and so everyone else had been on. All the other comics had died on their arses, so that should have told me something. Plus, because I was so nervous, I'd been drinking, so I reckon I'd had about 7 pints of lager. So put those all together. They pushed me on stage, and actually 2 comics from the circuit, who I subsequently got to know a bit, started heckling me. And just over and over again, one of them just shouted, "Fuck off, you fat cow," continuously, until I did indeed fuck off. After about 3 minutes.
What? Why didn't you give up? Why didn't you go, "Oh, this isn't for me, I'll go back to psychiatric nursing, it's a better class of abuse"?
Well, because first of all, after that first gig, because I'd been so drunk, I couldn't really remember it very well. So I kind of knew I'd been shouted at, but I didn't remember how bad it was. So I thought, what I'll do, because it did occur to me that it wasn't a proper comedy club, and I thought people would be a little bit more attentive, hopefully, if I went to a proper club where it's all set up for comedy. Because it does actually make a big difference. In terms of people's behaviour. Because, for example, at the Comedy Store Late Show on a Friday night, the audience know that they're a difficult audience, because that's what the myth is. So they try and live up to expectations, you know. So they're always horrible and always very, very drunk, because the Late Show starts at 12. So if you go on last in the Late Show, you go on at 2:20 in the morning. And you can kind of imagine what that's like. It's appalling. It's pointless, really.
I don't know, I'm sure the audience will agree. One of the things I love about your comedy is simply your voice. Your voice is absolutely distinctive. And Sandy Toksvig, I remember sitting in that seat a few months ago, said when she used to listen to new comedians, she could tell, not by the material, but she could tell whether they were going to be successful because of their voice.
Really?
Are you aware of how distinctive your delivery is, and that it's kind of, I don't know what the word is, it's almost as if You're trying to be slightly boring, but you're not. I mean that as a compliment.
Well,
Honestly.
I don't have to try to be boring. Well, I'm aware that my voice is a bit odd because whenever I kind of have to phone anyone that I don't know, like, the gas man or the boiler's broken down, I always get called sir on the phone. And sometimes when I meet people, they still call me sir because I've got this particular jumper, right, and it looks like a man's jumper. So if I've got, like, my hair's a bit of a mess and I've got no makeup on and my glasses. In fact, even last week I answered the door and this bloke went, "I've got a parcel for you, sir." And, okay, that's fine by me. And so I'm kind of aware that it's sort of, it's not a high-pitched, nice lady's voice like that. But yes, and when I started doing comedy, because I was so nervous, I did speak in a slightly weird way. And tried to sort of control my voice a bit too much. And I think it was Mark Steele that went around telling everyone I sounded like I was reading out the football results. Because I did, like that. And so I worked very hard on trying to sound normal after that.
Do you get nervous going on stage now?
Well, I think nerves are connected to, for me, to the nature of whatever show it is you're doing. So yes, I do, with some things and not with others. Whereas before it was just a blanket a week before I would get nervous. But now it's what's the nature of the gig, So for example, if I know I'm doing a corporate event and there's going to be 1,000 builders there, I'm very nervous indeed. Whereas if it's kind of, a nice, friendly kind of group of old hippies, then I'm not nervous.
I'm not quite sure what we've
No.
got.
I
We'll
don't
have
think
a
we've
look
got too
later.
many builders in.
Well, you never know. We'll have a look. But put it the other way. Does it excite you getting on stage and the audience reaction, getting something from the audience? Do you get something back?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Not all the time, but that's attached to things like hormones or just had a row with your husband or late, in a traffic jam. Like I did something last week and I was stuck on the M40 for like 45 minutes just standing still. So I was late, I was in a really bad mood, so all those things affect people, I think. And I mean, I always used to think that about athletes, particularly athletes that are competing in the Olympics. For example, if you're a 100-metre runner, you have that 9 seconds once every 5 years, or 4 years, is it, to do your best performance. And what if you've just had a row with your husband or, or you've got your period or whatever it is? I just think it's such a huge demand, really.
Well, we've got a lot of... I'm going to ask for the lights to come up in a second so we can see and get some questions and thoughts
I've heard
from the
you're
floor.
very attractive.
For a group of builders. But I've also got, thank you for all of you who've emailed or texted questions and so on. So I've got a couple I'd like to read out first before we raise the lights. How do you feel about the Great British Bake Off moving to Channel 4?
How do I feel about... Well, I don't think I was as appalled as everybody else was, really, because... I'm kind of a bit of a cynic, and I think this is the nature of television these days, and it's changing all the time. If you look at commercial companies like Netflix and the like. And the thing is that the Great British Bake Off is not an in-house BBC show. It's made by a production company. And the reason there's a lot of production companies exist is for profit. They want to do well so that they can make more programs, so they can make more money. And so, therefore, that they would accept a more, a better commercial offer. I'm not surprised by that. And I don't expect a lot of production companies to be wedded to the idea of the great BBC and its history, really. So I wasn't that surprised, to be honest.
I wonder, because you've got fairly young children, I mean, if they even care what it's on. Because certainly when I've talked to people under the age of 20, if they want to see, I don't know, The Simpsons, they don't care what it's on. They really don't. And do you think people really care that much?
I think older people do, and a lot of people that don't like ads care as well, don't they?
Yes.
You know.
And I don't like ads, so
Do you not?
I care.
Yeah.
Let's have the lights up and
I
get
don't
some
like
thoughts
ads
from them.
either, actually.
Can we have the lights up a bit? Who'd like to kick us off with a question or thought to Joe?
Oh, you're lovely.
Yes, there's a builder down the front here. We'll get a microphone to you.
This bit's like question time, isn't it? I always really love it when Dimbleby goes, and the man at the back in the red top, oh, sorry, madam. You know, he does that quite a lot, doesn't he? That's always my favourite.
I'll try not to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question which you may have already answered indirectly at the start, but I was going to say, do you think there's anything that shouldn't be joked about or made fun of in comedy?
No, I don't really. But I think it's not the issue of the topic itself, it's the issue of how you approach it. So I think everyone can talk about racism, for example, but some people, to me, will discuss it in an acceptable way and other people won't. So really, I think you can cover anything you want to. And in a way, that's the problem with judging it, because it's all about attitude, not really about, you know, the area that you're doing jokes about, really. And it's a fine line.
Thank you. Some more thoughts? Yes, lady in the front. Get the microphone to you.
Do you think that there's a place for feminism with the young generation of women? So I'm talking women who are perhaps 16 to 25. Do you think they need feminism?
I think there certainly is a place for it, yes. And if you look at the sort of burgeoning of websites like Everyday Sexism, for example, and if you look at evidence of the way that women are trolled, you know, online, I mean, if it hadn't been so awful, I just thought it was hilarious that someone wanted a woman on a banknote and got messages saying she should be killed and raped for it. You know, I mean, I just fail to understand how people can just do sort of such horrible throwaway remarks like that for just something that is so unimportant, really. But I mean, I kind of feel that we live in an age where the more abusive you are, the more airtime you get, e.g. Katie Hopkins, Piers Morgan, whoever. And so it kind of doesn't surprise me. But I am really pleasantly surprised about the way that young women are, really, because I think they're kind of very much... I mean, obviously there's a split. I don't think there's a feminist cohort on Towie, for example. But, you know, I'm prepared to be told that I'm wrong. And so my heart is warmed by the way that a lot of kind of young women that I speak to, it's very much uppermost in their mind. But they, I think for them it's kind of also a question of having rebranded it a bit, really, because in the old days, obviously, dungarees, Doc Martens, shaven head, feminist or plumber, who knows? You know.
Thank you. Some more thoughts? Yes, there's a lady, I'm hoping it's a lady, at the back there.
Do you have any advice for someone starting their career in mental health nursing?
Well, what I would think was be kind, really, is my advice, because I have met mental health nurses whose first commitment is not about kindness. And I think when you're working in mental health, you realise just how tragic and difficult some people's lives are and how much they're struggling. And one issue that I have with all nurses now becoming the proud possessors of degrees is that I think if you're not careful, the actual caring side of it will be pushed out in favour of kind of academic research and how much nurses will become kind of like mini psychiatrists in a way. So I'm not saying I don't want nurses to be fully in possession of the facts I do, because I want them to push out psychiatrists and manage the profession on their own, because I hope there's not many psychiatrists in tonight, but I do think in terms of actually caring for people, they do it rather better, really. So that's what I would say. Like, you know, it's easy in a job that's very stressful to lose a sense that you're actually looking after people who are suffering. But I would say keep trying at that, you know, and don't let that drift away.
Well, now we've offended builders and psychiatrists. We'll move on to lawyers shortly, I suspect. But just on that point, when you started, do you think, as a psychiatric nurse, do you think being in public service of one type or another had a much better image than it's had now? In other words, we've had quite a few years of people in political life suggesting that public service is, gold-plated pensions. They are people who are paid less relative to other people than they were 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So in other words, we say, aren't our nurses wonderful? Aren't our psychiatric nurses wonderful? But we actually pay them less compared to other professions than we used to. So therefore, you're not valued as much, is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I don't think nurses ever got paid an awful lot, really, quite honestly. I think there's a much bigger political agenda these days with the caring professions anyway. I mean, am I allowed to be political, or do you want me to stay off that? Well, all right, my feeling is that actually, you know, pieces of news about the NHS not being very good are grist to the mill for the Tory privatisation machine. So I don't think they mind if the NHS gets a bad press, because I think that they'll think more people will start signing up to private healthcare companies. So that's an issue that I have about the caring professions. I think the problem with residential care for the elderly is they are all privately run, those places. They are for profit. And, you know, I think if you pay people crap money, you can't expect a kind of gold star service, really, because also I have a very good friend that I was at school with, so she's knocking on a bit, who works as a carer, and she showed me her schedule for one day a few weeks ago, and she was visiting 17 elderly people in one day.
17?
17, and she was driving between them over kind of a pretty big radius, and she was on a 0 hours contract, and she just described how frustrating it is to get there and choose, what shall I do? Shall I wash them? Shall I feed them? You know.
Because you can't do it all.
Because you can't do them all. Because she had 15 minutes.
Yes, there's a lady at the front, and there was somebody up there as well.
Good evening. And
Hello.
Thank you for coming to Canterbury. You may remember in 2014 writing a foreword for a book for the Canterbury Forget-Me-Nots, sponsored by the Alzheimer's Society, called Welcome to Our World.
I do remember that, yeah.
And I was deeply touched at the end of your foreword. You said, here's a book that shines a little light. And that's what we as carers who are accompanying our husbands or wives who were part of this writing group felt, because it did enlighten everyone and gave them hope. Because I think it was the first book that was written by those with a diagnosis of dementia for those to prove that you could live well. Granted, they were in the early stages. So we're all waiting to see how it develops. those of us. But thank you very much indeed for your involvement.
Not
and
at
for
all.
the Alzheimer's
No, you're very
Society.
welcome. I think, you know, one issue is general ignorance, isn't it, really?
Yes.
Because,
And
you know,
fear.
yes, and fear as well. I mean, I know for a long time I kind of felt, well, I still do, really frustrated that the vast majority of people, and I have to say even friends I have who've been to Oxbridge, don't even know the difference between mental health issues and learning disability. And if people are that ignorant, what are we going to do? You know, it shocks me really. So,
It's a massive education
yeah,
project.
absolutely.
Thank you. And there's a gentleman there. Anyone else in the outer darkness at the back? Just give a big wave. There's somebody down there, and there's a lady down here. Gentleman up there?
Come on, chop chop. Sorry,
We'll
I'm
get
only
you
mucking
trainers
about.
for the next one.
Getting on is one of the funniest things I've ever seen, and thank you for it.
Thank you.
But in light of what you've been saying in the last few minutes, I mean, several things come up about the NHS. I mean, first of all, the trials of Kim Wilde and Den Flixter. To what extent are they autobiographical? And do you really think, and it's not a huge step, I think, from what you were saying before, that you know, the tragedy that they experience every day and the frustration is actually throughout the entire NHS, or is to some extent was it written, you know, to be apocryphal?
Well, in my own nursing career, I looked after. I worked on a ward for the elderly for 6 months. So really, in terms of experience, it was pretty minimal in some ways. Although 6 months is quite a long time, and I did take some stuff from that time. But also Vicky and Joe, you know, also had many experiences with friends or relatives. So, I mean, a lot of it was stories that we'd heard, you know, and I have a lot of friends that still work in the NHS. So, for example, I don't know, do you remember that big cardboard cutout, and as you walk past it, it tells you to wash your hands? Yes. Well, that is actually true, because a friend of mine who works in a hospital said they had several of those on each floor. You know, absolute madness, really. And actually, after we did the first series, lots of people would come up to me and tell me stories, you know. And I had this delightful woman who, I think she was about 93, and she said to me, oh, I've just been in hospital, and I was in a mixed ward, and oh, God, it was absolutely appalling. She said, there was a man in the bed next to me masturbating all night. And then she went, can you put that in? I was like, well, I'll do my best.
There's a lady over there.
Thank you.
Hiya.
When I first became aware of you on television, I was quite inspired by you, in that you sort of seemed to reflect things I thought, and you resonated with some of my views more than other people had, perhaps. Who influenced you?
Who influenced me? Well, I think in terms of demonstrating that you can go on TV and be the sort of woman that you want to be and not have to pander to other people's expectations, it was probably Victoria Wood, I would say. Because I think the thing about Victoria, she just completely went her own way. No one had really done that before, what she did. She just appeared to be kind of like, you know, having a chat, really. And so kind of, there was no big sort of show busy thing. And I know that, and I remember sort of saying to her once, you know, oh, I wish I wasn't so rude and I didn't swear so much and I could be like you. And she said to me, yeah, but I want to go fuck and be like you. So, you know, no one's ever happy, really. So, you know, but I think she was a shining example of, she exuded confidence and she was just so funny. Yeah.
On that point, there's quite a few questions on this, that some people still think that the stand-up trade is still very hostile to women, and also that some TV shows are sexist. There's a token woman comedian on. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Right. Well, yeah. I think one problem with panel shows is just pure numbers, because I don't know what the ratios are now, but I remember when I first started, I kind of vaguely counted who was on the comedy circuit, and there were maybe, let's say, 300 men and 35 women. So at that time, and that would have been the late 80s, you simply didn't have the numbers available, you know. And I still think that a much larger ratio of men to women exists these days. So first of all, you've got to get round that. Secondly, I also know a lot of female comics that simply won't go on those shows because they're scared of doing them, you know, in case they're awful on them. I mean, we all know what it's like if you're watching Have I Got News for You? And it's so stressful in some ways because you think, oh, that guest hasn't said anything for about 10 minutes. And then you start to be anxious for them. And if you're that guest, in your head, there's a voice saying, I must say something hilarious. I must say something hilarious. And if you say something that's not hilarious, then the audience just looks at you like you're dead. It's kind of like my life is over. It is really stressful, you know.
But has that changed? I mean, you don't know about the numbers, but do you think it's still, are audiences sometimes still hostile to women on the stage because they're women, not because of the material, just because it's a woman up there?
Yes, I think they are. And I also think actually the whole thing of like judging people on appearance as well. It's because I always used to think, won't it be great when, you know, women become, when the attitude towards women is more like the attitude towards men, whereas you take them on face value, it doesn't matter if they've got shit hair or a beer gut, you know, that there they are and you judge them. But actually, the interesting thing is, to me, it's going the other way, because I see a lot of male comics on stage, and the heckling these days has become far more about their appearance than it used to be, you know. So to me, it's kind of going the wrong way, really. It should be the other way, but it's not, and I don't know how we kind of arrest that. And certainly, when you're in an audience and there's a woman on stage, you know, when we used to talk about this, we always used to say that if someone heckles, that to a bloke they would heckle your shit, i.e. your material's rubbish, whereas to a woman it would be you look shit, you know, and that's how it broke down. And I fear that it probably still is, you know, a lot like that, really.
Some more thoughts. There's a gentleman up the back.
How did you deal with nerves getting on stage in the sort of early part? You said that it got easier as you went on, but how did you sort of transition to being as relaxed as you are today on stage?
I used to have quite a lot to drink. There was always a show in Edinburgh every year called Late and Live at the Gilded Balloon. And it's basically, well, you'll know about this,
Yeah.
It's kind of Scotland versus England, because most of the audience are Scots, and a vast majority of the comics were English. And so a lot of the audience would have gone down there just to kind of murder the acts on stage. And it had like a real fearsome reputation. So I kind of thought, it starts at 1 o'clock in the morning, everyone's been drinking all night, you know. And I thought the answer to dealing with it was to be as drunk as the audience. So I would just get really, really so drunk that I could barely talk. And to be honest, I really enjoyed it. So it kind of did work, that approach.
I think if you got as drunk as the audience for that, that is almost worth a medal in itself, frankly. Some more thoughts? Yes, gentleman at the back.
The only jokes I ever tell are ones I've heard from other people. In fact, one of your very good jokes I repeat occasionally. But how do you protect your material? Because obviously, in days gone by, comedians had sort of sets of jokes and their own material that they kept for themselves. But these days, it must be virtually impossible to keep any sort of good gag to yourself. And do you find that people copy you occasionally? And how do you deal with that?
Well, I think interestingly, actually, it was the other way around. I think in the old days, where you had your comics like Bob Monkhouse and Bernard Manning and your traditional comics, there was actually a pool of jokes that everybody kind of used to dip into in a way. And then as things evolve, for example, Bob Monkhouse wrote his own jokes, didn't he? He had books of them, and then one of them got, his books went missing or got nicked or something. And I think actually these days, the vast majority of comics write all of their own material, and they are actually very protective of it, really. But the problem is, there's a few comics around who are kind of well known for joke nicking, and there's kind of not an awful lot you can do about that unless you want to go and threaten people. I mean, there was a comic called Malcolm Hardy, and he stole a joke from an Irish comic called Ian McPherson, and the joke was, you only play Edinburgh, say, twice in your career, once on the way up, once on the way down. Great to be back. And so Malcolm just nicked this joke off him, and Ian found out about it and demanded £500 for the joke. And actually, he paid him it in the end. So, if you have a gentleman's agreement like that, fine. But most of the time, that doesn't work. I once went on stage in Leicester. And in fact, I was on in Leicester, and there was an open spot, a guest spot, a woman doing 5 minutes before I went on, and all her jokes were mine, which was just so weird, And so I had to cut that 5 minutes out of my own
Wow,
set.
that is...
Yeah, I know.
That's very strange.
And she kind of thought that was fine. So,
Did they find her body, or?
Did
they ever
Never
find her
found
body?
her body, no.
Well, how do you work? Do you literally sit and write? I mean, do you have a pen and paper? Do you type away? Do you go for a long walk with the dog? What do you?
I used to sit down and try and write, but it doesn't really work for me. It feels like homework when I was a kid, and so I tend to get ideas flit sort of into my head, and if I don't immediately nail them, because I'm the age I am, I can't remember them 10 minutes later. So. I write them down as soon as I get an idea, and so I have a book that I write ideas down.
But you always have with you somewhere.
Yeah. We know what women are like with their handbags. It's always in my handbag, and my handbag is always surgically attached to me somewhere. And and then I'll try it out and try and refine it at a live gig.
Well, you come to a place, you try it. If it doesn't work, you've got more tried and tested ones round it, and if that one doesn't work, you refine it or get rid of it.
That's right. I mean, I think there's two separate ways of doing new material. Someone like Lee Evans, he will start in January at a tiny little club in a pub with a whole new hour or hour and a half or however much he's doing, which obviously, because he's never done any of it before, would be crap. And then as the year goes on, he'll refine it, learn it properly, get rid of what's not working, put new stuff in. And by the time he gets to about September, he's then doing arenas, and he's really polished. And I think Victoria Wood used to do that as well. Whereas what other people do, I know Jack does this, and Jack D, and I do it as well, is I maybe do 20 minutes new stuff peppered in amongst the old, so that if they go down really badly, at least I've got some stuff that I know works. And then gradually, as you go on, you chuck out the old and do more of the new.
But have you ever thought, I've got this great idea, I'll do a whole sequence of gags about something, and it works brilliantly, and you thought it would work brilliantly, and it didn't? Have you ever had
Oh God,
that?
hundreds of
Lots
times.
of times.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then what do you do? Rewrite it first, and then finally abandon it if you can't get it right?
That's right. I'll probably try rewriting it 5 or 6 times, and then I'll just get rid of it.
You don't ever think that the joke was good, but that the audience stank?
No. No.
They're always right.
Well, again, like women comics always used to say to each other when we were sitting around slagging off the men, not very often, obviously, but that if a woman has a bad gig, she thinks it's her fault, and if a man has a bad one, he thinks it's the audience's fault. Sorry, guys. There's a few men sitting here with their partners going, why has she dragged me along?
Well, now you've offended more than
But
half
also,
the audience.
can I
We're
just
doing
say
okay.
that, interestingly, most of the people that have asked questions tonight are men. Have you noticed?
I have noticed that.
So come on, women.
So come on, women. Oh, yes. A lady there.
I do think it's an ongoing confidence thing, you know.
Hello, Joe.
Hiya.
Lots of my female comedian sort of heroines have taken the advertising dollar at some point, but you haven't.
No.
Have you?
No, I haven't. No.
So I'm thinking Victoria Wood did, Miranda Hart did, Dawn French did. A lot of them eventually advertised something, and I wonder why you haven't.
Well, I think because I think it's wrong to be paid money to say words for a company. I know that sounds like sort of simplistic, but to me it degrades your independence as a person. So, I mean, say for example, I advertised Sainsbury's, right, and then I wanted to slag them off. Obviously, I couldn't because they would stop paying me, you know. And people say to me, "Well, why can't you just not slag Sainsbury's off?" But what I feel about that is that by doing that, if I did that, that would have eroded a little bit of me that I would feel bad about it. No one else would care because I have people saying to me all the time, you know, you can earn an absolute bloody fortune for adverts, and you can, it's true. I mean, I've even had people say to me, well, do them abroad and then no one will know. As if that's all right. And actually, that is what a lot of people do. A lot of people go to Japan, they go to South Africa, they do ads for places abroad where they think, I mean, obviously, with, global communication increasing, it's getting harder and harder to do that. But certainly, I know a lot of people that did that, and I just can't bring myself to do that.
There's maybe a related question, which is, what is the worst thing you've ever done for charity? That was emailed in, thank you.
The worst thing I've ever done for charity? Well, I think that the thing with doing charity gigs is they have a kind of, they have a sort of edge to them, really. And I've never been able to work out what it is, but it seems to consist of the audience thinking, we've paid our money, so we don't really have to enjoy it. And so a lot of charity gigs are really, really hard work, you know, and I've made some serious errors of judgment at charity gigs. For example, I was at a pro-choice gig raising money for a charity that wanted to change the law, and I did a joke about saying, oh, you know, my boyfriend's a bit insensitive because when I had an abortion, he bought me a bag of jelly babies. And in my head, it was really funny. There was just this gasp of disbelief. I know, and so that I've mucked up a lot with that sort of thing. I've done that and made really serious errors of judgment. And I suppose the most difficult thing I did for charity was the walk that I did for Sport Relief last year. That was really hard, really hard.
Are there, when you travel around the country, are there places you think, do you know what, that's going to be quite tough? That place is always tough. Those audiences are always tough, or not?
No, I do, yeah. And like over the years, I've kind of sort of stopped going quite so often to them. So, no, I mean, they're all kind of really interesting. Like Middlesbrough, for example, they don't really laugh in Middlesbrough. They just clap a lot at the end. So when you're doing the gig, you think, oh, they really hate me. And then they go absolutely mad at the end. It's so weird. I don't really know why they do that. But I've talked to other comics about it, and they feel similarly about it, you know. And some gigs down south, like Surrey, gigs in Surrey, they're a bit kind of, who do you think you are, you oik? You know, just entertain us and talk about Jane Austen or something. You know, sometimes you do feel that you're not kind of sort of, you know, artistically acceptable to certain audiences. Where else is Nottingham? Always so pissed they can barely listen. I don't know why that is. I made a terrible error of judgment in Glasgow many years ago. I did.
They're quite a tough audience.
They were tough, and it weirdly, I'd done a gig in Edinburgh and then gone on to one in Glasgow in the same night. And Edinburgh, all quite prim and proper in many ways. Went to Glasgow, was quite drunk by the time. This is the story of my life. I don't really drink anymore. But they were really horrible to me. You know, they were really kind of going at me. And I knew I shouldn't have said it, but I couldn't help it. And I just put my hands on my hips and went, who fucking won at Culloden then? And I had to be taken out the back of the building. And I regret it, but it kind of reminded me of when I was a kid and my brothers were at me, you know. My brothers used to like wind me up massively, so I would say the most awful thing to them. I'm sorry, Gavin.
Well, you remind me of a taxi driver in Glasgow who once told me, I had one of your people from London in the back of the cab last night from the BBC in London. And he said it didn't go well. I said, why didn't it go well? He said, I hear your football team did very well, this being Glasgow. And he said, Celtic had just beaten Rangers 3-0. He was a Rangers supporter. Oh. He said it was a wee bit frosty. I think we've got time for one more question. Yes, lady in front.
You've just done so much in your career, and you know, from the mental health nursing to the stand-up and to the TV and everything. What do you want to do in the next 10 years? What's your ambitions really still in the world?
I'd quite like to lie down. Really, because the thing is, because my kids are they're teenagers, they're 14 and 16, and I kind of feel like I wish they were older. Because I've got kind of quite a bit more work to put in, you know, and I do feel like about 90 years old. So, no, I don't really want to age them up because they're lovely, actually. But do you know what? I would really like to write a detective novel and see if I could do it. Because actually, I love sort of high-end detective novels. I don't know if anyone ever has read Susan Hill's series of, they are so great, aren't they? Yeah, no, they don't like them, but I do. I think they're really good. And, yeah, we know her. You know we don't like her. So I would just like to kind of have a crack at that and see if I can do it, because I've watched so much stuff. I used to love Inspector Morse, you know, I love all that kind of thing, and just to see if I could do it, really.
What do your family think? What do your teenage children think of what you do?
Well, when it benefits them, they're very impressed by it. So if I can introduce them to someone under the age of 70 that they admire, they suddenly love what I do. But a lot of the time, they're kind of a bit dismissive of it. You know, when I did the pilot for Damned, the social work thing, I said to my oldest daughter, what did you think of it? She said, I thought Ramesh Ranganathan was great. And so, you know, I don't blame them in a way, because kind of that's their generation. But when my oldest daughter, first at primary school, aged 4, probably nearly 5, she came home and went, Mum, and I went, what? And she went, are you Joe Brand? And and I said to her, why did you say that? She says, everyone in my class says you are. And I thought, popular with 5-year-olds. My career's on the up.
I think that's wonderful. But do you try out jokes on them? No. You try out material on them?
Not really, no. I mean, I do a lot of stuff in my set about my husband and how awful he is. And
some of us men had noticed that. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Well, all his friends say to him, actually, let her get away with it, Bern. And, you know, because obviously we have that sort of relationship where he tells me what to do and I do it. But I do sort of check with him if I think I'm going to do something really horrible about him. Like I wrote a joke because I did do a corporate event for a load of builders, and they were all looking at me like, "Oh my God, who's this?" And the audible sigh of despair went round the auditorium when I stepped on stage, and I said, "Actually, I do know a lot about building because my dad is a structural engineer, my brother's a quantity surveyor, and my husband's a fucking plank." And I said, and that just kind of came to me while I was on stage. And so I said to him when I got home, "Do you mind if I call you a fucking plank?" And he went, "Be my guest." So, you know, I think the thing is actually, the reality of it is that actually if he was that awful, I don't think I'd be doing jokes about him. I think I'd be running 100 miles an hour in the other direction. And I think actually it's kind of, you know, it's something that just sort of tips the balance back our way a tiny little bit, you know, and it's not a big deal.
Do you think, just to end where we kind of began, do you think comedy changes things? It changes the way people see subjects? Do you think it has an impact beyond the night and having a few pints and having a laugh?
I don't think it does in a big political way, no. I mean, hopefully... I mean, one of my favourite moments in my whole life was I was having a coffee in central London, and a woman who I think was probably in her mid-70s came up to me and she said, "I came to see you once, and you did some great put-downs, and I've used a few of them, and it's changed my life." And she said, you know, someone shouted at her out of a van or something, and she shouted back, "Fuck off or I'll sit on your face." And there is an extra bit to that, but she didn't manage to get the really horrible bit in, which is quite good. And I kind of felt really pleased that I'd given someone a bit of confidence, you know. I mean, because I just think that one thing that happens with women is that, and it really is improving and it really is getting better, but I think that women are kind of bullied into being a bit ashamed sometimes by men who are bullies, you know, and that it's kind of really important to speak out about it. I apologise for what I'm going to say now, but I just want to give an example. I was doing a big corporate gig. It was an advertising awards, and this one advertising company just kept winning everything, and I was gently kind of taking the piss out of them, nothing major, just, "Oh, not them again," you know. And then they won the overall award at the end of the evening, and the CEO or whoever it was, managing director, came up to get the award. And as I handed it over to him, he shook my hand and he got really close to me and whispered in my ear, and he said, "I always knew you weren't funny, but I never realised what a cunt you were." And I just thought that is such a typical example of the way that women can get bullied. Because I think what he hoped was that I would be so ashamed of that I would be kind of silent and just kind of withdraw and, you know, feel humiliated by it. And I just thought to myself, I'm not having that. So it was the end of the night, and I said to the audience, "Thank you very much, you've all been great, apart from," and I named this guy, because this is what he's just said to me. And I told the audience what he'd said. And I really felt, and in fact a lot of his employees came up to me afterwards and said, "Actually, he really is a cunt." But you know, I think if that gives one woman the courage to kind of speak out about someone, you know, who's bullying them, who's sexually harassing them, who's sexting them and they don't want it and they feel awful about it, then I really hope it does. Because I think women were forced for years, and still are, to keep quiet about these sort of things or feel that they can't speak out about them. And I think the more of us that do, it can only make things better for all of us.
On that very inspirational, great note, great evening. Thank you very much. Thank you for being a great audience. There will be, I should say, talking about charity, we also collect for the Kent Opportunity Fund, so if you'd like to make a donation on your way out, it'd be most welcome. But thank you for your great questions, and particularly thanks to Joe.
Thanks very much. You're great. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.